we couldn't find a really small bench. We just had one of the really long workshop benches. And we had to get on for the
about bloody 5 meters long.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Interval Conversations. I'm so glad to be joined today by my friend Jake Smith. Now, Jake is a playwright creator based in Hull. So Jake, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks, Nathan. How are you?
I'm very good. Now, Jake, would you like to tell us how you got your start in script writing?
Yes. So, I first involvement I had with writing was when I was a member of the Nottingham Youth Theatre. I joined when I was 10 and I left when I was 21. So it was a long road there. And we used to write little jukebox musicals and stuff. But I went to university really wanting to be an actor, and I was very singularly focused. And I sort of fell into playwriting almost by accident. We did project in second year based on a play called Musidorus, which is an almost lost play, which is around the time of Shakespeare. It was written by the most prolific of all authors, anonymous. And we rewrote it and we reworked it. And working on that script, I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to do more playwriting, and I sort of just threw myself into it there, and I very slowly moved away from the acting and devoted myself entirely to writing things.
Yeah, so would you like to tell us about some of your show experiences as well? So plays you've written and had staged, stuff like that.
Okay, yeah. So the first play I actually ever, full play that I ever wrote was a play called The Bench, which is a series of loosely connected love stories that take place around a park bench. And I wrote that in my first year of university, way back in 2015. Yeah, 2015, second half of my first year of uni. We went up to the Edinburgh Fringe and did it as part of the Z Theatre Company, which is an amazing theatre company that the university called. Yeah, Zeddies, exactly. And we went up and we did The Bench there. We had a great laugh doing it, and as is usually the case for student productions, it got the worst reviews you can possibly imagine. God, yeah. Absolutely trash. The Scotsman hated it. But I think the Scotsman hate most things.
The show I took up, they were actually really nice. They enjoyed the show. We were like, what is going on?
Jesus.
Broadway Baby hated it. Broadway Baby hated us. No, it was the Edinburgh Guide who hated us. Scotsman loved us.
We were the only people. The Bench was the only production in my year to get a 0-star review. And that was from the Ed Fringe reviewers. The actual Ed Fringe reviewers came and reviewed it and gave us 0 stars. And I still have that review printed out somewhere. I printed it because I was that proud that I'd annoyed someone so much they felt the need to give me 0 stars.
So I printed out one of the reviews from Grannies with Guns, but I don't know where. I think I've lost it, moving house and stuff.
I came back from. Sorry.
Go on. Sorry. I'll tell you after.
I came back from Edinburgh, and the next play that I'd sort of, when I was in college years ago, I wrote a short film called Marx, which was just weird in every sense of the word. It had ninjas and rom-com features and lots of weird bits and bobs, but I'd had in my head the idea of trying to adapt it into a play for a while. And so I worked on the script, and Vodka Chess and Dressing Gowns was born, which you are very familiar with, of course, because you made it happen with me, and I had a great time doing that. That was in second year, third year?
2016.
When did we do that? 2016.
2016, I think it was.
2016,
yeah, it was.
So it was my third year, blimey. We're skipping forward a little bit. Yeah, so we did Vodka Chess and Dressing Gowns, which was a sort of odd, surreal rom-com situation. But what it really brought to me was that I had this love of writing things that were playful in their language and played with the form of a play and how you can present things in a very different manner, which then when I came on to write my next play, which was more The Art of Revenge, really came into pass. And I've always been a massive lover of Shakespeare. and to take that sort of fractured, playful way of presenting a story and pair it with my love of Shakespeare was really what drove me to write more, which was a reimagining of Othello. And we staged that twice. We did a workshop production in April 2019 and then a full production in November 2019. Yeah, and it was very successful. It sort of modernizes, reimagines, transforms Othello into this, we called it rave theatre. There was lots of neon and spray paint, and you know, people got stabbed and their blood was green neon because it just looked awesome. And we had
a different cast every
UV
night.
lights everywhere. We had UV lights everywhere, so the lights went down and just the whole theatre. Well, I say theatre, we did it in an abandoned warehouse in the middle of Hull. But no, so, and then now I'm working on a new play, which sort of follows the same idea, taking Shakespeare and pairing it with this, with a strange way of showing it. But I'm writing a play called Patience, which is set in the 80s, and it pairs my love of 80s culture and 80s music with Shakespeare, but also for me it's the next logical step from more. It takes all the things that I learned writing more and producing more and sort of continues that journey on. So I like to think there's a bit of a spiritual sequel in a way.
Yeah. So what is your writing method for these shows?
So I'm very meticulous in terms of method. I'm very specific. I don't. I have a very structured way of writing because I'm so. What's the word? Scatty. That if I just try and sit and write something, I'll just get distracted and end up browsing the internet or scrolling down Facebook. So I have to analyze. So I'll have a basic idea of a story, and then I have to break that story up into like acts, and then I'll break the acts up into scenes, and these are all bullet points, just written one sentence bullet points, and then each scene gets split up into until I've got a series of bullet points. And if I did look this up just before this interview, for More the Art of Revenge, which was an hour and a half, 90-minute show, by the time I'd broken it down to the bullet points that I needed to start actually writing the script, I had 473 bullet points.
Jesus Christ.
So that's how I write. I write to the point where I've got everything planned out so meticulously that I don't have to write in order. If I want to start writing a bit that I'm excited to write, and just start, because I don't have to think about where I've been or where I'm going, because that's already planned out, that's already done. I only have to think about this bit, this piece of action that is being written right now, which is great for me, because if I start trying to think forward or backwards, I just get distracted, and that's how I end up with plot holes that just can't be filled. Which, when you're writing in iambic pentameter and rhyming and poetry, is complicated enough. You don't you don't want to be worried about plot holes. So for me, I've always found that the best way for me to write is to plan to within an inch of its life.
I should probably start doing that, really. I just write and I make vague points.
See, I wish I could. I I really do. I love the idea of just putting my fingers on a keyboard and letting it go. But if I do that, I just end up with dribble.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen Adam Hutton's reviews of some of my plays.
I've seen Adam Hutton's reviews for a lot of plays.
Shout out to Hutton if you're watching. But last time we were talking, really, you were re-going over Vodka Chess and Dressing Gown script.
Yeah.
You have to go at that again. So what's your process for revisiting and rewriting the script?
So I never like to think of the script as done. You know, I now have Vodka Chess. Thanks to your good self, I have a beautiful published copy of, and I recently got myself a book, a published version of More the Art of Revenge. But I think if you close the book on a script, if you just say that's done now, it's a beautiful artifact of something that I once made, it loses. The beauty of theatre for me is that it's live, and it's real, and it's in the moment. And if you treat plays like artifacts, then they can never live or breathe. This is why I'm so big on adapting and transforming Shakespeare, because for me, there's no point in doing a play if you're just doing a preserved, embalmed version of something that was presented 400 years ago. I don't see the point in that personally. If people enjoy it, that's great, but for me, there's no point. So when I finish a play, I'd never feel like it's finished, and I always want to go back to it and play with it and adjust it. And when in the future, whenever I am involved in any production of any play that I've written, no matter how long ago it will be, I will always treat it like it's a live piece of writing, like it's something that we're working on. I'll never put it down and just say that's finished now. Apart from anything, because I'm far too fickle, and I'll read scenes that I've written for plays that are long done and go, oh, if I just put this bit in, it would have been so much better. And actually, for me, having the freedom to say, well, I can. I can just add that. This is mine, and I can just add it whenever I want. I don't need to say, oh, well, that play was 2 years ago, it's time to leave it now. Because if I think of something good for it, then why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't it go in? So yeah, no, I am having a relook over vodka chess. Like I said, for me, I feel like I'm still learning, I'm still developing. Especially more was massively important for my development as a playwright, and a lot of the stuff that I've learned in terms of getting an audience into and involved in a play made me think this would be really good to retrospectively apply to vodka chess and dressing gowns. So yeah, I'm having another look at that script. It's a fun script, it's a silly script, and so I'm using it sort of my downtime from Patience, because Patience is a intense, emotional roller coaster. So I'm enjoying going, okay, this is getting a bit much now, I'm going to wheel vodka out of a play.
Oh, I do miss vodka chess and dressing gowns. That was a fun
Yeah,
but
no,
stressful show.
It was stressful, it was intensely stressful, because, they gave us 2 weeks to rehearse it, and we all thought it was going to be this little beautiful invite-only show in the little studio theatre, and then they sprung on us, oh no, you're getting a paying audience, and you're in the big room, and we were like, what? This play was not, it wasn't written for a theatre that size for a start. And suddenly we're in a 200-seater theatre with just space, so much space. But I'm proud of that. I'm really proud of that. And I look back and I never think, although there are so many things I want to change with the script and I want to adapt the script, I never look at that production and go, oh, we could have done this differently. Because I think what it was this perfect piece of, because it was produced in such a panic and such a just absolute speed. It had this buzz, like every moment on that stage, it felt like, oh God, what's going to happen next? Because the truth is, no one knew.
Neither did we.
No, exactly.
Like, directing the show, you just sort of left me to do it. Then you filled in over here. So wonderful Liv Hoare helped out. I just remember us all merging to do the first and last scene together, because the first and last scene are the same scene but told from different perspectives, and they have to merge at a certain point. So how in the hell are we going to do this? So we just ended up running both scenes at the same time and hoping it'd work.
Yeah, this is an anecdote about more, but it sums that up perfectly. When Sammy was directing the second iteration of More, we sat down for a sort of post-rehearsal debrief, and he just looked me in the face and went, "You don't think about directors when you're writing, do you?" And I went, "Nah.
No, he does not.
Work it out. It's not my problem."
God damn you, Jacob.
But I think,
God damn you.
I think it might come across as selfish, but I think a director's, how do I put this? If a director has a strong enough vision, they'll work it out. And I like to write things that are challenging and interesting for an audience, and unusual for an audience. You know, seeing the same scene twice from two different perspectives. I'm not saying it's never been done before, because it absolutely has, but it is unusual. And so if it's a directorial challenge, tough, basically.
I'm just going to talk about vodka chess because.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I remember the one thing I remember. It's something that came in one of the final rehearsals, because obviously it's a Jake Smith play, so we had a bench as well.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
we couldn't find a really small bench. We just had one of the really long workshop benches. We had to get on for the
5 meters long.
We had to get on for the park scene, and it was Finn and Mikey.
Yeah.
And we just decided, would it be more funny if they just took the long way around and swiveled it instead of just like dragging it?
It became one of the funniest moments of the show.
Yeah, got around.
It was absolutely one of the funniest moments of the show. And it's just a testament to me about how, for me, absolutely, a play is so much more than the words written on the page. And any writer that thinks there's some kind of auteur who creates this entire world and the director has to honour his script is an idiot, because the beauty of a play is having all the different elements come together, and that was undeniably one of the funniest moments in that show, and it never would have happened if it wasn't for you and the actors and everyone being in the right place at the right time, because it wasn't on the page. And it couldn't have been on the page because I didn't know when I wrote the script that the bench was going to be 5 meters long. And so this is a massively important thing to me as a writer, is knowing and accepting that there is more to the play than me. I am not the beginning and the end. I am just one part of this life cycle. And that's really important to me. And I do find it really difficult to let go of plays. You know, I'll be sat in the rehearsal room going, that's not how I thought it would be read. But then I'm like, you know what, actually, this is not my bit. I've done my bit, and there's more of my bit coming, but this bit is not for me. And it's a challenge, but it's really rewarding. Once you've dealt with letting go, it does become really rewarding.
Yeah. that sort of brings us on to another good point. Throughout like rehearsals and stuff, how did your scripts change, like when you were doing more? And obviously vodka chess, we just talked about that changing and adding stuff.
Yeah.
Like, how do you input?
More was an interesting one to work on, because we were a Thursday Children, which is a theatre company that we were working as part of at the time. Myself, Sammy, Becky, and Lulu, the production team on More. We operated under the most collaborative sense that we possibly could. We tried really hard not to conform to the thought of, you know, the writer, the director, the producer, and it didn't. There were many ways in which it didn't work. But one thing which did really work was that I tried to be in the rehearsal room as much as possible. Which, you know, when you've got a 2-year-old and a wife who works full time, wasn't always possible. But I was in the rehearsal room, I'd say, for more, you know, at least 70% of the time. And we were always conscious of trying to have that back and forth between Sammy and me and the actors. It was a 3-way street. You know, the actors would come to Sammy and say, this line doesn't feel right. It doesn't quite gel with how I'm playing the character. And then Sammy could turn to me and say, I need a new line. And I'd just go, here's a new line. And they'd go, oh, that's better. So we had this constantly going on. And there's so much of that script between the workshop production in April and the original production, as we call it, in November, that changed. Like, there are only 2 characters that remain from version 1 to version 2, and that is entirely down to the collaboration between writer, performer, and director. I was really proud of the fact that I managed to create characters that were strong enough that the actors felt that they could say, I know this character and this bit isn't right for them. And because of that, I was able, when it came to rewriting it after the workshop, to go, this character isn't serving the purpose I want them to serve. You know, I need a character that does this, and this character can't do that. So I just took them out and literally wrote a whole new character to fill their place. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without that collaboration and that willingness to change. You know, we were sat in a tiny little cellar theatre, literally called the Cellar Theatre in Sheffield, beautiful space. And Sammy had this amazing idea for this lighting motif, but it didn't gel with one of the lines that I'd written, because there was something in the line about dark, and there was something in his effect that he wanted it to go light. And I liked his effect that much that I rewrote my script to fit his lighting. And I think that's really what I did. So in answer to your question, in a really long-winded, roundabout way, yes, absolutely, the script changes in rehearsal. I've said already that I'd never like to think of the script as done. And for me, that first day of rehearsal is not the end of the writing process. It's the beginning of the second part of the writing process for me. I will constantly be rewriting during rehearsal. Ethan Lang, who brilliantly played Benedict in More, both times, in both productions, will tell you that I have a nasty habit of providing monologues with hours to learn them. And I make no apologies for that.
Vodka Chess, Rachel Elmer, she had this really lovely monologue, but obviously it was short space of time. So it's like a proper page to learn.
Yes.
And Mikey as well, he had a lot, but it was like monologue. There you go.
Yeah, Mikey Barker had that whole play been live. So obviously the play was, some of it was pre-recorded film and some of it was on stage. But had the play been live, Mikey Barker would have had more lines in that 35 minutes than Othello has in Othello.
That's Jake Smith for you, everyone. Jesus.
That's how many lines that man had to learn.
You're a monster. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know one of them already, as you've mentioned, but who do you class as your main influences when you're writing, and how do they affect your work? Obviously, we brought up Shakespeare.
Yeah, so obviously Shakespeare, yeah. I mean, Shakespeare is a weird one because I spent so long not liking Shakespeare. I think because it's so boring at school, and everyone goes through that, and everyone goes through and I think that's why I like it so much, is because I learned to argue that against that point. I learned to say, hang on a minute, it's only boring because we're doing what they did 400 years ago. When it was written and when it was first performed, it was crazy and experimental and exciting and strange. And that's why I like to adapt and rework Shakespeare, because I want to give it that back. I want to present these stories in a way that are just as mind-blowing as they would have been in the 1600s. And so, yeah, so Shakespeare, massive influence. I take a lot of influence from film, and that obviously was quite obvious when it came to Vodka Chess, because I literally put film into the play. But I love the works of Edgar Wright, for Shaun of the Dead, for those of people who don't know who that is. A massive influence is Blackadder. Like, there is definitely some influence from Blackadder in every single play that I've written. Usually that dynamic of the clever bad guy with the stupid sidekick. I just copy and paste that into almost everything that I write, because it's such a well-written dynamic, Blackadder and Baldric, that it can be pasted into any play, almost any play, and it works. And it's not original to Blackadder. They just did it brilliantly. And it appears in Shakespeare and ancient Greek plays and all over the place. That's master and servant is just classic. But what Blackadder did was it reversed it. So usually in the classic plays, the master is a moron and the servant is clever. And Blackadder reversed that after season 1.
Yeah. We don't talk about season 1.
We don't talk about season 1. But so I mean, and then also musical theatre. So I'm a big musicals fanboy, as anyone that has spent more than 30 seconds on my Facebook will tell you. And I like to think about plays as music in terms of musical form. I like to think about that idea of the big showstopper number before the interval and the 11 o'clock number where everything comes together, and then you have that really quiet bit at the end of self-consideration. this idea that songs become scenes in a play has really appealed to me, and it's really prevalent in Patience, which I'm working on at the moment, which takes 80s music it takes that idea so far as to I've given each scene a song. I listened to so much 80s music, and every scene literally has a song, which doesn't necessarily appear in the scene, but I've just written it to remind me of what the feel of the scene needs to be. So like there's a confrontation scene between two arguing lovers, and I just wrote at the top of the scene, "Humanly, don't you want me, baby?" And that's what's in my head when I'm writing it, and I'll put it on repeat and while I'm writing, just so I got that feel coming through.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're my. I'd say that's my main inspiration. There are many, many others, not just writers, but directors and designers. I absolutely, I adore. I adore the. I'm trying to think of more influences. There's so many. There are so many influences, and I think. My style of writing, my skill, really, where it lies is I like to think of my work as like a collage of words, and I will openly and happily admit that I, much like Shakespeare himself, which is a sentence that sounds very big-headed before you know the end of it. I don't have very often an original thought. I'm far better at taking lots of other people's thoughts and going. And I'm not ashamed of that. I think if it's good enough for Shakespeare, it's good enough for me.
So yeah, I just have one last question for you. What advice do you have for anyone trying to get into script writing?
Okay, so there are two pieces of advice I can have. The first piece of advice is the one that every writer will tell you, which is watch theatre, but also watch films and read books, and just engross yourself in art and in literature, and any medium of storytelling, whatever that may be. Comic books are brilliant for storytelling if you can't be asked to read much. Just engross yourself in stories, and the more stories you engross yourself in, the more likely you are to go, oh, well, this tiny bit of this could be expanded into something completely new. And that's where I get a lot of my ideas. I'll be watching a TV show and I'll say, oh, well, that's a really nice idea, but they wasted it on a subplot. I'm going to take that and make that a whole play. My second piece of advice, which is a piece of advice that I wish I could give to myself 5 years ago, is do not ever dismiss an idea. Because some ideas aren't ready when you've got them. The famous anecdote that J.K. Rowling always tells us that Harry Potter wandered into her head practically fully formed on a train between London and Edinburgh. And that's great, and some ideas like that will happen like that. Vodka Chess wandered into the original version, the short film, wandered into my head pretty much fully formed. The Bench wandered into my head pretty much fully formed. Patience, which I'm working on at the moment, is an idea I first had 5 years ago. And I went, and I worked on it for a bit, realised I couldn't make it work, and I threw it away, and I forgot about it. And I wish now that I'd known not to do that, because some ideas, you will have them and they're brilliant, but it's just not their time. Sometimes it's fine to say, this is great, I'm going to put it on the shelf, and I'm going to come back to it when it's ready, when it's cooked. And I think that's my biggest piece of advice, is there is no bad idea. Some ideas just aren't ready yet.
That's some brilliant advice right there. So
thank you.
Thank you for coming along this week's episode. You guys can find Jake on Facebook. It's Jake Smith Creator, I believe.
Yeah, J.K. Smith Creator. And I've also got a website, which is www.jasmithwrites.com.
Link below. Well, Jake, thank you for coming along, and thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Interval Conversations.